From the outside, you married a winner. The kind of woman people describe with a low whistle and the word driven. She built something out of nothing, and you were there for the nothing part, which means you're allowed to feel proud. So you do. You feel proud most of the time. The rest of the time, you're standing in a dark kitchen at 11:40 p.m., holding 2 plates of food that have gone the temperature of the room, listening to her voice drift down the hall. Warm, animated, fully alive, talking to a client she has never met about a deadline you will never see. And you realize the person she saves her best energy for is not, and has not been for a while, you. 1. You married the ambition. You want to be honest, so start here. The ambition is why you fell. You remember it clearly. She talked about her business the way other people talk about someone they're in love with. The same lit-up face, the same inability to shut up about it at parties. And you love that. You told your friends you'd finally met a woman who wanted something. You meant it as the highest compliment a person could pay. You did not yet understand that you were describing your competition. She is not a rare species. Women now own more than 4 in 10 American businesses, and the number of women-owned firms grew roughly twice as fast as men's between 2022 and 2025. Nearly half of all new businesses started in 2024 were launched by women, and 3/4 of them say the whole point was to be their own boss. Which sounds like freedom, which is sold to you as freedom. Nobody prints the small line at the bottom. Being your own boss means the boss lives in your house and never clocks out. In the early days, you found it romantic. You'd bring her coffee at her desk at midnight and feel like part of a heist crew. Us against the world. You were the calm one, the safe harbor, the guy who reminded her to eat. You had a role, and the role felt noble. What nobody tells you is that a safe harbor is, by definition, a place a ship leaves. She docks with you, she refuels, and then she goes back out to the only ocean that has ever fully held her attention, and you stand on the shore with a spatula, telling yourself that being needed is the same thing as being wanted. It isn't, but it's close enough to keep you standing there for years. 2. The third person in the bed. There are 3 of you in this marriage. 2 of you are human. The business does not have a body, but it has a schedule, a temper, and a way of walking into every room she's in. It joins you for dinner in the shape of her phone, face up beside her fork, glowing every 90 seconds like a small, needy animal that has to be checked. It comes on vacation. You have learned that "let's unplug this weekend" is a hostage negotiation in which the business always keeps one limb. It gets into bed with you both. In the blue light of the laptop, she swears she's closing. In the sentence that starts, "Sorry, I just have to send one thing." A sentence that has never once, in the recorded history of your marriage, resulted in one thing. You have started to think of it as an affair. Not a fair comparison, you tell yourself, because it's work, and work is virtuous, and you can't be jealous of virtue. But the anatomy is identical. She lights up for it. She lies to you about how much time she spends with it. She defends it when you bring it up. And when you finally say, carefully, that you feel like it comes first, she looks at you like you've asked her to choose between you and her own oxygen, genuinely wounded that you'd make her rank the 2. Researchers who study this have a bloodless phrase for it. They say workaholism predicts marital disaffection, and the 2 behaviors that predict it most are over-controlling and impaired communication. Translated out of the journals, she runs the marriage like a project she's behind on, and the 2 of you have stopped actually talking and started exchanging status updates. Did you call the plumber? Is your mom still coming? Did you eat? Logistics wearing the coat of intimacy. The cruelest part is that she's not doing anything wrong. She's not at a bar. She's not texting someone else. She's 12 feet away, in the room you can see her in, and she has never been further from you in your life. You do still share a bed. Emotionally, you may as well be filing in separate time zones. 3. The rules. You were never handed. Nobody sat you down and read you the rules. That's the thing about this kind of marriage. The contract is invisible, and you only find the clauses by breaking them. Rule 1. Her time is load-bearing and yours is flexible. Her calendar is a cathedral. Yours is a suggestion. When something has to give, a sick kid, a broken dishwasher, a dentist appointment that can only happen at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday, the math has already been done before the conversation starts, and the answer is you. Not because she doesn't love you, because her hour, in the household ledger, has been quietly assigned a higher price than yours. and you both signed off on that exchange rate so long ago, you've forgotten it was ever negotiable. Rule 2. You do not complain about the thing that pays for the life. This is the trap with teeth. The business bought the house, the trips, the good insurance, the version of your future you actually like. So when you finally work up the nerve to say, "I miss you," it lands like ingratitude. You're not allowed to resent the source of the good life. You just get to quietly drown in it and smile at the neighbors. Rule 3, and this one you'd never say out loud, you learn that the more successful she gets, the more the world watches your marriage like it's an experiment that might fail. Female breadwinners make up about 16% of American households, but show up in something like 42% of divorces. You didn't know that number when you married her. You just felt it, the way you feel weather coming. So you adapt. You get good at eating alone. You get good at the phrase, "she's slammed right now." You get good at being the reasonable one, the low-maintenance one, the one who never makes it a thing. Until low maintenance stops being a personality and starts being a headstone. You wanted a partner. You became infrastructure. 4. The man who does the dishes. Somewhere along the way, you became the wife. Not in any way you'd say at a barbecue, but functionally, structurally. You're the one who knows where the kids' shoes are. You're the one who texts, "We're out of milk." You're the one holding the domestic universe together with both hands so that her business can float freely above it, unbothered by the gravity the rest of you live under. And here's the part that scrambles your anger, the part you didn't expect. She's not off the hook at home either. The research on this is almost funny in how bleak it is. Women who out-earn their husbands don't do less at home, they do more. They cook more, clean more, manage more of the invisible mental to-do list. Sociologists call it the compensation effect. This instinct to overperform the wife role precisely because they've stepped out of it in every other way. So you're both drowning. You're just drowning in different rooms and calling it teamwork. That's the thing no one warns you about. You keep waiting for a villain to appear so your resentment has somewhere to go, and none arrives. There's just two tired people and a machine that eats both of them and calls it success. Your own identity, meanwhile, is quietly evaporating. You used to have hobbies. You used to have a Saturday that belonged to you. Now your entire sense of self roots through hers. Her wins are the family's wins. Her stress is the family's weather. Her calendar is the family's constitution. When people ask what you've been up to, you catch yourself answering with what she's been up to, and you hear it, and something in your chest goes quiet. You are a supporting character in a life you also technically live in. You tell yourself this is love. And it is, partly. This willingness to shrink so someone else can expand is one of the realest things a person can do for another. But love and erasure share a border, and you have stopped being able to see the line, mostly because you're the one standing on it, holding a dish towel, wondering when you last felt like the main event in anyone's day, including your own. 5. The resentment. You're not allowed to have. Resentment in your marriage is contraband. You are not permitted to feel it, so you've learned to smuggle it in through jokes. You've become very funny about it, actually. "Oh, we should ask my wife if she's not in a meeting with herself. I'd check with her, but she's married to Q3 this month." You deliver these at dinners and everyone laughs, including her, and no one notices that a joke is just resentment that got past security. This is a documented survival technique. It has a name in your house. The name is "I'm kidding." The problem is that resentment doesn't disappear when you laugh at it. It composts. It sits in the dark and turns into something denser. A low, humming grievance you can't fully justify, because every time you try to build a case, the evidence acquits her. She's not cruel. She's not lazy. She's not doing anything you're technically allowed to be mad about. She is simply, relentlessly elsewhere, and you've been told your whole life that a good partner supports ambition, so you're stuck being angry at a woman for succeeding, which makes you feel small, which makes you angrier, in a loop with no exit. There's data underneath your dread, if you ever went looking. When one person in a marriage is a genuine work addict, that marriage is roughly twice as likely to fail. And in one large survey, nearly half of divorced people named career and work choices as the single biggest source of conflict in their marriage. More than money, more than sex, the work itself. You didn't need the study. You've been living inside its footnotes for years. What no one prepares you for is the guilt on top of the resentment. A resentment sandwich, guilt on both slices. You feel it? Then you feel bad for feeling it. Then you feel bad that you feel bad. And the whole thing collapses into a heavy silence you carry around like a second job. And she can tell something's wrong. She always can. She just doesn't have the bandwidth to open the file. So she asks, "Are you okay?" While already half turned toward her phone, and you say, "Yeah, just tired." And you both accept the transaction, because the alternative is a conversation neither of you has 45 uninterrupted minutes to have. You're not tired. You're starving at a table full of food. 6. Are you too still? The performance is a full-time job, and unlike hers, it doesn't pay. In public, you are seamless. At the party, you refill her wine, you laugh at the right beat, you touch the small of her back when someone takes a photo, and the photo is genuinely lovely. You'd frame it, you have framed some of them, because the two of you are, on a technical level, extremely good at looking like a marriage. That's what makes the private version so disorienting. The gap between the photo and the drive home. In the photo, his hand on her back. On the drive home, silence so complete you can hear the turn signal like a heartbeat monitor. And then there's the question. You know the one? Someone at the edge of the friend group, a little too casual, a little too curious. So are you two still going strong? With that pause in the middle, the tiny hesitation that tells you they've already noticed something you thought you were hiding. You say, "Of course, better than ever," and you say it fast, and the speed is the tell. People don't rush to confirm the things that are actually solid. The neighbors have theories. Her family has opinions they express as concern. Somebody's mother has said the words, "a woman that busy," in a tone that did a lot of work. You defend her reflexively. She works hard, we're a team, it works for us. And every defense is true, and every defense costs you a little more. Because you're not just carrying the marriage now, you're carrying the press release about the marriage. And those are two different weights. The strangest part is how convincing you've gotten. You've performed fine for so long that sometimes you fool yourself. You'll be mid-anecdote, telling the group about the trip you took, and for a second you'll believe it was the trip in the photos, and not the trip where she took 2 calls at the beach and you built the sandcastle alone. Then you get home, and the house is quiet, and the laptop opens, and the animal starts glowing again. You're not pretending for them anymore. You're pretending for you. 7. Why you stay. Here's the question that ambushes you at red lights. Why don't you leave? And the honest answer is a tangle you can't fully pull apart. Some of it is love, real, unironic love, the kind that remembers who she was at the nothing stage and still roots for her at every stage after. Some of it is the life, the house you'd have to sell, the kids whose whole world is this arrangement, the math of divorce, which sounds expensive and lonely, and like starting a business you have no interest in running. And some of it, you'd only admit this at 2 a.m., is that you're proud to be married to her. Being the calm center of a storm that impressive is its own kind of status. You get to stand next to the achievement. You get to be the person she comes home to, even when coming home means 12 feet and a laptop away. You have confused proximity to a fire with being warm. But underneath all of that is the thing you rarely name. You stay because leaving would require admitting that the marriage you have is not the marriage you're describing to everyone, including yourself. And that admission is more expensive than any lawyer. So you keep the arrangement running, not because it's good, but because it's legible. Everyone knows their role, the bills get paid, the photos still look right, and stability, it turns out, is a drug you can stay on long. Past the point it stops healing anything. You've built a whole identity around being the one who understands. She's building something. You've said it 1,000 times, to friends, to her mother, to your own reflection. And it's true. She is. You're just no longer sure the thing she's building has a room in it for you. Or whether, at some point without a ceremony to mark it, you stopped being her partner and became her longest-running act of neglect. You stay because you love her. That's the part that makes it unbearable. If you didn't, you could go. 8. The thing nobody says. Here's what nobody says out loud, so you'll say it here, in the dark, where it's safe. You don't want her to fail. You would never wish that. But some sick, exhausted part of you has caught itself hoping, just once, for a slow week. A quiet Tuesday. A stretch of days where the animal stops glowing, and she looks up from the desk and remembers there's a whole person standing in the kitchen who has been waiting, patiently, for years, to be the most interesting thing in her day again. That's the confession. Not that you resent her success, that you trade some of it, quietly, guiltily, for the version of her that had time to be bored with you. You are still married, in every visible way. The ring, the shared calendar, the polite goodnight, the photo on the mantle where his hand is on her back. On paper, this is what a good life looks like. The business, the house, the two smart, tired people who built it together. And maybe that's enough. Plenty of marriages run for decades on logistics, shared bills, and the fact that no one has quite decided to stop. Yours might be one of them. You might grow old at the edge of that desk, and it might, in its strange, lopsided way, still count as love. Just know what you're choosing. You didn't marry a woman who works too much. You married a woman with a great roaring love of her life. And you keep telling yourself it's the business, because the other possibility is that it was always going to be something, and it was simply never going to be you. Loving an ambitious woman is one of the finest things a person can do. Just don't be surprised, somewhere around year 10, when you check the calendar to see if you're still on it. Good night. Text her. She'll see it between meetings.